At 19, after an accident erased years of her life, Sarah Garrett did the impossible. She rewrote the version of her future everyone else had already decided for her. She faced a stacked deck, doctors who called it irreversible, courts that favored certainty over curiosity, a memory that came back in pieces, and the world treating her as if her fate had been signed. Instead of accepting the verdict, she treated the problem like a puzzle. Her solution was simple and relentless: collect small, ignore details, turn patterns into proof, and force the system to answer questions it didn't know how to ignore. A kid from a small town who taught herself coding at night, a regional chess champ by 14, and someone who kept obsessive notebooks of tiny clues, Sarah used those quirks as tools, not quirks as excuses. In the next minutes you'll see the 3 moves she used to outmaneuver experts, the tiny observations that became courtroom-changing evidence, and the mindset shifts anyone can borrow when life looks predetermined. If you want real tactics for turning small facts into big leverage, stay with me, watch to the end and learn how to change a story that seems already written. 1. The unthinkable bet: how an 8-year-old was lost in a poker game. A child left at the edge of a green velvet table becomes a symbol before she becomes a person. Adults sharpen their voices and dull their eyes until a living, breathing human is reduced to a wager. The room smelled of cheap whiskey and old cologne, the kind of air that makes promises sound lighter than they are. Sarah sat on a cracked stool, knees swinging, watching chips stack and fall like tiny, indifferent towers. The problem was not only the bet itself but the way everyone framed it: a laugh, a slap on the back, the casual language of ownership. One man announced a stake with the showman's cadence, a wager tossed like a joke into the center of the table, and the room obliged by treating the joke as if it were law. Adults who should have protected her traded her name for momentum, as if a child could be handed across hands the way money can. Fear flickered in Sarah's chest, quick and precise, but she did not panic. Her solution began with silence. Small children are trained to be quiet. Sarah turned that training into a tool. While the adults argued about odds and bluffed about hearts and kings, she watched faces instead of cards. She cataloged a nervous tick, the way a thumb tapped when a player held a losing hand. She noticed the dealer's left eye drift to the window when he planned a steal. That inventory, minute, human details, became her map. When the pot was pushed forward and the air thinned with expectation, she spoke up not with pleading but with a single, clear fact: whose child she was and why she could not be currency. The matter-of-factness cut through the performative bravado. One of the men, the one with the soft voice, recognized her name, and that recognition paused the momentum. Details matter here: a paper napkin with a phone number folded into a secret pocket, a neighbor who'd once watched Sarah on chore duty, the worn photo in her mother's wallet that made a player's smile falter. Sarah used these facts as negotiation pieces. She offered to fetch the wallet. She suggested a call. She pointed out an old scar on her knee that meant the woman across from the table was not a stranger. These were not theatrical ploys. They were evidence that humanized her instantly. When the men grumbled, one shifted his stack back, and the tone at the table softened. The bet unraveled because too many people suddenly remembered she was a person, not a chip. Integration of that night's lesson stayed with her. Observation is power, and the right fact spoken plainly can reroute intentions. She learned to read the small tells not just in poker but in negotiations, in offices, and in streets where decisions are made in passing. The unthinkable bet became a template for outsmarting larger systems later on. The same attention to detail that stopped a wager would later allow her to anticipate moves, to defuse risky gambits before they hardened into fate. If this moment leaves you unsettled, let it sharpen you. Pay attention to the small tells around you, and keep a fact or two ready: a name, a number, a photo, because sometimes a single clear truth is all it takes to stop the worst bet from being laid down. 2. Deadwood 1877, the brutal reality of child labor and mining camps. Deadwood in 1877 was a raw, rapidly grown mining camp carved into the Black Hills after gold discoveries drew thousands of people into makeshift settlements. Tents and timber shacks clustered along muddy lanes, while saloons, assay offices, and blacksmiths elbowed out space for boarding houses and crude laundries. The town's boom brought families as well as single prospectors, and children became part of the workforce almost as soon as they could move among the sluice boxes and tailings. Workers young and old handled the dirty, repetitive tasks of placer and surface mining, hand-panning gravel, shoveling sluice boxes, hauling buckets of water and ore, and hand-sorting rock for visible gold. Many girls found employment in boarding houses, laundries, and as domestic help, where long hours and exposure to coal smoke and soot were routine. Exposure to mercury from amalgamation, used by some miners to recover gold, posed an invisible, lingering danger. Children who handled contaminated pans or lived in dust-choked cabins risked serious health effects. Injuries were commonplace, too. Falling timbers, sudden slides in shallow diggings, and burns from open fires were everyday hazards. Coping strategies emerged out of necessity. Families pooled labor, with older siblings taught to sort ore and younger ones assigned lighter but essential chores such as carrying water or running messages. Churches, missionary groups, and itinerant teachers sometimes set up makeshift Sunday schools or small classrooms in tents and saloons, offering basic literacy and a brief respite from work. Apprenticeships and on-the-job learning also served as informal education. Children who learned blacksmithing, carpentry, or mule handling could later parlay those skills into steadier urban trades when the boom faded. The lived detail matters: a child's hand stained with black sluice gravel, the rattle of pans in a shallow stream, the metallic tang of ore in the mouth of a working claim. Sanitation was poor, clean water uncertain, and winter brought hunger and cramped quarters. Disease followed where people clustered. Those harsh conditions shaped life trajectories. Some kids hardened into miners, others left for towns with structured schools and safer work. Preservation of diaries, letters, and oral histories from camps like Deadwood helps trace those paths without romanticizing the danger. Learn from these records. The resilience of children in mining camps underscores why modern child protection laws and labor standards matter. Visit local archives, support museum collections, or read primary accounts to deepen understanding, because remembering the realities of frontier child labor keeps us vigilant about the welfare of working children today. 3. Education as power: how self-taught legal knowledge became a weapon. Procedural rules, not passion, often decide what a judge reads and what evidence ever sees the light of day. Sarah Garrett learned this quickly. The unpredictable tilt of paperwork and deadlines was the real barrier between her and justice. Facing gatekeepers who treated her like another unhappy file, she discovered that mastering the mechanics of the system, service rules, pleading standards, evidentiary objections, could flip the script. That realization turned legal literacy from passive knowledge into an active, repeatable strategy. The problem was simple: she had the facts but not the format. Court clerks, opposing counsel, and rushed judges respond to clarity and compliance. Her solution was to become fluent in the language of litigation. She spent long hours in public law libraries and at open court hearings, absorbing how motions were structured, which phrases persuaded clerks to accept filings, and how judges reacted to poorly supported claims. She used plain, verifiable sources: state courts' self-help guides, lawhelp.org, the Legal Information Institute, and combined them with practical templates from court websites to produce filings that looked and read like professional work. Short sentence. Tactical, not theoretical. Details matter. Sarah taught herself to build airtight timelines, attach admissible exhibits, and cite rules of civil procedure where they mattered most. Instead of relying on emotion at hearings, she brought precise requests: a motion to compel production that named specific documents, a narrowly worded subpoena that targeted a single custodian, a carefully drafted affidavit that established personal knowledge and avoided hearsay pitfalls. She learned to use discovery as a fact-finding engine, drafting interrogatories that forced opposing parties to explain inconsistencies and requesting production of emails and phone logs that often revealed more than testimony. When a hearing approached, she prepared short, bullet-point argument outlines and 3 case analogies pulled from freely accessible opinions to show how courts had handled similar procedural issues. Concise. Effective. Integration of those skills turned every administrative obstacle into an opportunity. Knowing filing deadlines let her convert opponent oversights into default advantages. Understanding jurisdictional limits allowed her to challenge improper venues swiftly and efficiently. Mastering evidence rules helped her exclude hearsay or introduce authenticated records. She also leveraged community resources, law school clinics, local bar association pro bono hours, and clerk's office forms, to validate her drafts before filing. By blending self-taught procedural savvy with targeted professional help when stakes rose, she amplified limited resources into courtroom credibility. Takeaway: legal knowledge is scalable and actionable. If you want to emulate Sarah's approach, start with self-help sections of your state court website, read local rules, practice drafting a simple motion, and use public hearings as a classroom. When complexity grows beyond templates, partner with a qualified attorney to review strategy. Act now. Study 1 rule a week, draft 1 pleading, and attend 1 open hearing. The system rewards those who respect its form as much as its substance. 4. The historical ruling: how Judge Parker empowered a 15-year-old girl. Judge Parker reinterpreted the reach of the law in a way that put a spotlight on youth agency, asserting that a 15-year-old could, under certain circumstances, be treated as a decision-maker rather than merely the passive subject of adult choices. The problem in the courtroom was simple and human. Sarah Garrett faced a system that presumed incapacity, leaving critical decisions about her life in hands that did not know her mind. Legal tradition and social custom had funneled her into dependency. The judge's bench became the place where that funnel was inspected and, crucially, unclogged. He solved the immediate crisis by framing the question narrower and smarter than anyone expected, not whether minors could be autonomous in every realm, but whether this particular young person had demonstrated the maturity and understanding required for the decision she urgently needed to make. The ruling granted her standing to act on her own behalf in the limited sphere at issue, which changed everything for Sarah. Suddenly, the law acknowledged observations already plain to teachers, neighbors, and clinicians, that maturity can outpace years, and that legal rules must sometimes bend to individual realities. Details of the opinion mattered because Judge Parker anchored his reasoning in concrete indicators of competence, consistent testimony, clear expression of goals, knowledge of consequences, and a history of responsible behavior. He balanced those with safeguards, a tailored order that preserved oversight without silencing Sarah's voice. Counsel for both sides walked away with a playbook, gathered demonstrable evidence of understanding, presented clearly, and asked the court for a calibrated remedy rather than wholesale emancipation. In practice, this meant the court could authorize a narrow form of self-determination, for instance, approving a medical decision or a contractual choice tied to education or housing, while keeping broader protections in place. The ripple was immediate and practical. Advocates used the ruling to press for assessments that prioritized a teenager's expressed values, social workers revised intake protocols to record demonstrated decision-making skills, and attorneys began crafting petitions that argued competency in context rather than age alone. That integration of law and practice turned a single courtroom victory into a model, specific, replicable, and respectful of both protection and autonomy. If you care about smart youth advocacy or want templates for arguing capacity, study the reasoning and adapt its safeguards, then bring those tools to schools, clinics, and legal clinics where they can make the same difference for other young people. 5. Building a legacy, from poverty to a successful business owner. Sarah Garrett grew up with limited financial resources and little access to traditional support networks, and those constraints shaped every choice she made as she moved toward entrepreneurship. Facing common barriers, scarce capital, unpredictable income streams, and a lack of business mentors, she had to convert immediate survival tactics into long-term strategies. The problem was clear: without systems for steady cash flow, scalable skills, and stable operations, any early success could evaporate. She treated poverty as a set of constraints to outmaneuver rather than a permanent identity. She responded by turning capability into currency. Rather than waiting for perfect funding or formal credentials, she identified what she could improve quickly: a skill, a simple product, a reliable service, and made it market-ready. Early steps included bootstrapping basic tools, validating ideas with neighbors and local clients, and using customer feedback to refine offerings. Creative financing mattered as well. She leveraged community resources, tiny loans, or grants geared toward micro-entrepreneurs, and bartered services to cut startup costs. Each small sale was reinvested deliberately, not spent, and that discipline turned tiny profits into operational breathing room. Operational rigor followed. Sarah built simple systems that scaled, standardized pricing and invoicing, a basic bookkeeping routine, and a repeatable production workflow so quality didn't depend only on her presence. She focused on margins, knowing which products or services carried the healthiest return, and eliminated offerings that drained time for little reward. Marketing was practical, not flashy. She used word of mouth, consistent local visibility, and a clear story about why her business mattered to customers. Hiring happened in stages, first contractors to handle overflow, then steady employees from the same communities that raised her, creating loyalty and a dependable labor pool. Protecting the enterprise came next, formalizing the business structure, separating personal and business finances, and documenting processes so the company could operate without constant anno domini hoc decisions. Building a legacy meant thinking beyond immediate growth toward permanence and community impact. Sarah closed the gap between personal success and communal uplift by embedding mentorship and training into the business model, apprenticeships, on-the-job training, and pathways for employees to become owners or managers. She prioritized governance, an advisory circle to provide strategic perspective, transparent accounting practices, and succession planning so the business wouldn't hinge on a single person. Philanthropy was practical rather than performative. The company supported local skill-building programs and helped finance microloans for aspiring entrepreneurs. Those choices converted individual advancement into generational change. Take a pragmatic next step now. Inventory your marketable skills, list the smallest viable product or service you can deliver, and find one local resource to test it, an incubator, a community bank, or a neighborhood market. Start with repeatable systems, basic bookkeeping, customer follow-up, and a reinvestment plan for early profits. Think about legacy from day one by documenting workflows and sharing responsibility. If Sarah's path teaches anything, it is this: build with intention, protect through structure, and expand by lifting others. Start small, act deliberately, and plan the foundation you'll hand forward. 6. The ripple effect: how one act of courage changed educational laws. A single formal complaint by a student can trigger a multi-layered review of educational policies, and Sarah Garrett's case shows exactly how that chain reaction builds. Faced with an entrenched rule that singled out students for disciplinary measures without clear due process, she chose the administrative route first, filing complaints with her school and then with the state education office, forcing a paper trail that could not be ignored. That paper trail is crucial. It converts anecdote into evidence and gives administrators something concrete to respond to. When internal channels failed to produce meaningful change, strategic escalation followed. A carefully drafted legal brief, collaboration with civil rights advocates, and targeted media outreach widened the spotlight. Short bursts of intense public attention often move reluctant officials into action. In practice, this looks like school boards convening special committees, independent audits of disciplinary data, and agreements to suspend problematic enforcement while reforms are negotiated. Those interim steps protect students immediately and buy time to design durable solutions. Concrete remedies tend to cascade outward from the originating district. A consent decree or settlement often includes not only individual redress but also system-wide mandates, revised codes of conduct, clearer definitions of due process, mandatory staff training, and independent monitoring. These are not cosmetic fixes, they alter daily operations. Teachers receive new protocols for documenting incidents. Administrators install transparent appeals processes. Data collection practices are standardized so disparities no longer hide in inconsistent record keeping. Other districts watch these remedies and borrow language for their own policy updates, creating a de facto model policy that spreads without needing legislation. Legislative change frequently arrives after those local shifts create a blueprint and public appetite for broader reform. Lawmakers respond when constituent stories reveal a recurring gap in protections, and they can adopt statutory language that codifies practices proven in settlements. Beyond lawmaking, professional associations and accrediting bodies often issue updated guidance informed by high-profile cases. Teacher preparation programs revise curricula, and advocacy groups produce toolkits to help students replicate successful strategies. The ripple widens further when courts interpret settlements and administrative decisions, producing precedents that other plaintiffs and agencies cite. Support structures multiply the impact. Pro bono legal clinics train students and families on filing complaints. Journalists and researchers publish data-driven analyses that make disparities visible. Grassroots coalitions sustain momentum between court deadlines and legislative sessions. If you want to replicate this effect where you are, document incidents carefully, seek legal advice early, build local alliances, and push for remedies that change systems, not just resolve individual grievances. Small acts of courage can become the first stone dropped into a pond. With strategy and allies, the ripples become policy. She turned a countdown into a second chance. When fate seemed written in cold iron, Sarah Garrett found the crack in the story and slipped through. Faced with an unstoppable pattern of accidents and a town convinced nothing could change, she refused to accept inevitability. Using a mind honed by late-night chess matches, a knack for patterns learned from her grandmother's poetry, and a self-taught fluency in code, she built a predictive model that didn't just forecast disasters, it gave people moments to choose differently. By age 21 she'd already saved a dozen lives in one night, rerouted an interstate catastrophe with a single hacked signal, and reminded everyone that courage can be engineered as much as it can be felt. The solution wasn't magic, it was pattern spotting, relentless empathy, and tiny, decisive interventions that added up to a different future. The details matter, the way she mapped near misses like musical notes, the single line of code that bought 3 extra seconds, the small kindnesses that made strangers trust a stranger's warning. Those are the building blocks you can use in your own life. Noticing recurring risks, asking the hard question, and acting before fate becomes a fait accompli. If Sarah's story moved you, hold on to that feeling. Look for the patterns you ignore, speak up when a small action can change everything, and tell someone their choice today could save tomorrow. If you want to go deeper, subscribe. Next week we'll break down the algorithms she used, hear from people she saved, and explore the ethical choices behind changing destiny. Share this video with someone who needs hope, leave a comment with what you do in Sarah's shoes, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next episode. Because Sarah didn't just outsmart fate, she reminded us that the future can be rewritten, one choice at a time.